So, it's been a minute. Went missing for a bit last year, so I thought maybe it's worth reintroducing myself. Hey guys, my name's Sean Dove, and I'm a creative from Melbourne, Australia. I'm the art director here at a studio and production company called Chocolate Studios. See the goofball in the beanie? Yeah, that's me. I'm a lover of all things design, particularly when I get to play with 3D. Side note, last year I got to marry my best friend, an absolute stunner, which was quite honestly perfect. I think I'm just going to enjoy this for a second because these lockdowns haven't been all that kind to the waistline. Alright, I think that's enough self-indulging. So, what are we having to play with today? I've recently been exploring soft bodies inside Cinema 4D to get these nice cloth wrinkles. A lot thanks to a 3-part series that Chris Schmidt put together from Rocket Lasso, where he really goes into the detail of how to fine-tune the effect. And I really recommend you checking out his whole series. Using some of the techniques he discusses, I wanted to share my approach to achieve this fun logo reveal as the cloth spins up around the ball. I shared this on Instagram and a few reached out wanting to know some more detail, so I thought, let's give it a go. Alright, with cinema open, let's jump in and start having a bit of a play. Now first up, I'm going to grab a plane, and this is going to be our cloth surface. I'm going to jump both our width and height up to 1,000 each, get us a bit more surface to play with here. Nice, and then let's just grab a floor as well, give ourselves something for the cloth to glide into. I'm just going to create a material and throw that onto our plane just so we can see that a little bit better, and I'll rename this. This is going to be our plane cloth. Nice, let's just lift this up a little bit off the ground, so when we do our simulation, it's just got somewhere to fall and it's not already intersecting with the floor. All right, with our floor selected, I'm going to grab ourselves, I'm going to come up to tags, simulation tags, and throw in a collider body. And then on our plane, same thing, let's go tags, simulation, but this time let's throw on a soft body tag. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to be borrowing some techniques from Chris Schmidt's series, so make sure you do check that out. So let's just hit play, and great, this is all working as it should. Our plane just falls a little bit and is caught by the floor. Our plane just falls a little bit and is caught by the floor. It's exactly what we're after. I'm just going to hit Command D before we go any further. I'm going to change our frames per second. I'm just going to drop this down to 25. Let's grab our dynamics tag that we've applied to the floor, and I'm going to kill all the bounce. And at the same time, let's double our friction. Let's push that up to 200. I'll grab our soft body tag on our plane. I'll do the same thing. I'll kill the bounce. And friction around 90 should be fine. We'll leave that at the default. I'm just going to swing around here and look top down onto our plane. Let's throw in a camera, and I'm just going to zero out our heading and our pitch. Let's make that -90. And then I'll just zero out our position on X and Y. And great, now we're looking straight down at the center of our plane. Let's jump back into our soft body tag. And what I found here, we're not going to go too much into the detail, but the shear pushed up to 100 and the flexion at 15. That's what I found gave me some really nice results. Now, as I hit play, you're going to see that nothing's really happening yet. But where the magic really comes into this is by animating the rest length. And at the moment, our rest length is 100%. So let's come forward 5 frames, and I'm just going to keyframe that. And then let's come forward to frame 20, and I'm going to reset this to 150. So now it wants to be 50% bigger. And as I hit play now, you're going to see it actually grows that 50%, which is great. So let's rewind to 0, and let's jump into our plane. And so the width and height segments, obviously the more segments we give it, the more detail we're going to get, but also the render hit we're going to feel. So what I found worked really nicely was 95 segments in both, but let's just push it to 50 at the moment just so we can get some playback happening in our viewport here. So even just going to 50 and 50 with that nice high friction, our soft body is starting to create these fun wrinkles into our cloth. And this was sort of the basis of Chris's technique. Great, so that's all working well. I'm going to rewind to 0. And what we actually need is for something to be our ball to essentially stop the wrinkles happening in the middle there. So let's just throw a sphere into our scene, and this is what's going to be our blocker. This is what's going to be our blocker, if you will. So I'm going to jump into all our 4 views, just lift our plane so it's above the ground there. Then let's come up to tags, simulation tags, and we'll add a collider body straight onto our sphere. And the shape automatic would be fine, but we can also change this to ellipsoid, which should make it run a little bit quicker. And I'll also just kill any bounce on our sphere. And now as I hit play, and we'll just give this a few frames to play out. Remember, at that frame 20 is where we've got the end growth happening from that soft body sim. So it's in our frontal view, we're starting to get that cloth animating up and around our sphere. Let's just hit pause there. And as I jump into our perspective view, you're actually going to see that our sphere is blocking any of those wrinkles from growing in the center. And that's exactly what we're after, even with this low poly count on our plane. Nice, that's all working quite nicely. Now, as I said, in the final result that I was having a play with, I found pushing it to both 95 in the width and height is what really gave me some nice detail. So let's push them up, and actually let's shrink our sphere a little bit. Let's pull that down to 60, and I'll just jump into our 4 views here, just so I can align that closer to the floor. I don't mind if it's intersecting with our plane a little bit. That'll get pushed underneath as soon as the simulation starts. All right, let's jump into our perspective view, rewind, and let's just hit play. Now this is going to run significantly slower. Like I said, the more polys, the more detail, but ultimately the longer it will take to render. So let's just give that a second. So now between frame 5 and 20, this is where our plane's going to start growing. That sphere is going to be a block right in the center there for us. So hopefully now with the higher poly count, we're going to actually see some really nice wrinkles forming up. And nice, I'm going to stop this at around frame 30. Let's jump out of our camera for a second. You see we're starting to get some really nice, really detailed wrinkles in our cloth, and that sphere, even being smaller, is acting as a really nice blocker there for us. None of these wrinkles are intersecting with it. You can see they're taking on the form of our sphere. And I can drop that plane into a subdivision surface, and this is going to really smooth out all those facets, and that looks really nice. It's going to kill the subdivision for now, so we can keep working away. And where I am here at frame 30, I'm happy with those wrinkles. So I'm going to set the initial state. We essentially wanted to generate some wrinkles before we animate that rotating effect. So now let's jump over into our soft body tab, and our rest length. You can see by frame 30 here, which is where we are, we've actually scaled up that 50%. We're now at 150% within the rest length, and this is what we want to maintain. We don't want to shrink it back down to 100%. This is our new final scale. So by holding Command and Shift, I can just click on a little stopwatch there, and that'll delete any keyframes. And now when I get back to frame 0, we are maintaining that shape that we set. Now comes the next step of actually getting this to spin up and wrap around our sphere. So I'm going to come up to forces, and I'm going to grab a rotation. Now by default, this is actually going to be spinning on that ball orientation. I'm sort of spinning this rotation here. This is the way by default it wants to sort of wrap up and over. So that's not quite what we're after. So I'm just going to grab our pitch direction and just rotate that -90. And this will, just by doing that, we've now got our rotation to be able to spin up anti-clockwise, if you will. Now in our rotation, the angle speed, this is essentially how strong it can take effect on our object. So what I ended up finding was around 4,000. It spins quick, but it'll give us some really nice results. Now if I just hit play right now, you can see that it's trying to spin our entire geometry, and it's look, we're not getting nice playback. So what I'm thinking I might do is I'll kill that, And for now, let's create a low poly version of what we've got. So our plane, I'm just going to duplicate that. What we're going to do is we'll make a copy of that, and we can call this low res. This is just for our reference to start to demonstrate what this rotation is going to do. And I'll hide our dense mesh for the moment. I'll just kill the dynamics on that one. Now in our low res one, let's pull this back down to 50 segments in both the width and height. And for this, I'm actually going to need to reset our rest length keyframes. Let's go to frame 20, add a keyframe at 150%. Let's go back to frame 5 and I'll pull that back down to 100. This is just so we can reset that initial state of already having some wrinkles in our cloth. And I'll also just turn off our rotation for the moment. We're not gonna need that while we're just setting our initial state. So let's hit play. This is gonna play much quicker for us with that lower mesh. Remembering at frame 20 is where we've got our final growth, and then we'll just give it a few extra frames to sort of settle down a little bit. And nice, I'll stop it there. Jump into our dynamics tag on our low res reference here, set that initial state, and again by holding Command and Shift, I'll just kill any of those keyframes on our rest length, making sure that we've got this now fixed at 150%. Let's come back to frame 0. Now we can return on that rotation, and 4000 might be a little bit strong with our lower mesh. I'm going to pull that down half. Let's make that 2000. Got to make sure I do turn it on. So let's rewind, give that another go, and great. You can see this is exactly what I want it to do. It's now spinning our entire mesh. Let's stop that, come back to frame 0, and essentially what we want to do is limit where this rotation can happen. So we can do that pretty simply. Let's go into our fall off and add a spherical field. And what we want this to do is just be, what I found is to be a little bit larger than what our sphere is. So let's have a look at that. And we're not seeing a lot. So let's pause, rewind, and we'll come into our rotation to the object, and let's rebump this up to around 4000. Keeping in mind we are doing this just on our low res mesh, so it's certainly not going to look as nice as what our final product will be, but I just want to be able to get some playback in the viewport so you can see what this rotation does. All right, it's not quite wrapping it up as I'd like, so I'm going to increase our spherical field and play that again. And there we go. Now we're starting to see it influenced on our mesh. Now, certainly with this low poly mesh, it's looking a little bit rubbish, but I'll just let this play out a few more frames. And if I stop it there and drop our low res mesh into a subdivision surface, you can, even with this low poly, you can start to see our mesh is folding up and it's wrapping around. And so this is essentially the idea, what we want to happen on our high res mesh. It's going to pull that out of that subdivision surface because we don't need that. And you know what? I'm just going to completely delete that low res mesh. You've seen how it works now. So now we want to make that happen on our high res mesh. Let's re-enable this, re-enable the dynamics. And on our rotation, I'm just going to shrink that spherical field a little bit. Now we don't want this to start straight away at 4000. We want to essentially work up to it. So I'm going to keep this animation reasonably quick. Let's go. So let's add a keyframe at frame 15 for our angle speed where we are at that full strength of 4000. Then let's come back to frame 5 and we'll add another keyframe where this is zeroed out. So now we've got those 10 frames for it to essentially build up to max strength. And I'm not going to let this run for too long. Let's go to frame 30, and we'll add another keyframe at the value of 4000. And then I'm just going to come forward 2 frames and zero this back out. It's going to be a real sharp finish. And I'm going to reduce our timeline as well to not 500 but 50 frames. So we'll just give us a 2-second animation. We'll get it nice and quick for us. Now, unfortunately, with this higher mesh, my machine just does not like it. So I'm going to bake out our simulation with that rotation so we can get an idea of what this is going to look like playing back at real time. Great, so you can see frame 0, it actually a bit of a dead frame, but as soon as I come forward that first frame, we've got our initial state that we set on our plane. So let's hit play. Okay, we're getting somewhere, and you can start to see that rotation having a bit of an effect. But ideally, I'd like this to be a little bit stronger, and maybe stronger is the wrong word. But what I'd like is for more of our plane to be influenced. So we can actually do that quite simply by grabbing our spherical field, and I'm just going to scale this out a little bit. I'll clear our cache on our plane, and then I'll just increase our spherical field on our rotation there. And this now should allow it to have more polygons to influence, which should really start pulling it in. Now with that cache cleared, let's rebake this and we'll take another look. Now we're getting somewhere. You can see that just by increasing that spherical field and giving it more polygons that it can influence, it's really starting to pull tightly on our plane, and we get a really nice wrap around that sphere in the middle there. Nice. I think this is looking pretty good. This is exactly what we're after. Of course, now we can grab our plane, drop that into a subdivision surface, and it's going to give us some really nice smooth wrinkles in our cloth. All right, perfect. We've got our animation set up. It's all baked. We're getting it to play back. Now comes the fun part of actually setting up the logo reveal. So I think this would be a good place to save and make sure that we've got our logo format set up correct to be able to bring it in. All right, I'm in Illustrator here, and I've got our little AO logo for the Australian Open. Now I thought we're working with a round ball, so we can really pull any logo in here. I've also got the FIFA and the NBA logo set up ready to go, so we might be able to have a bit of a look at that. Now our document's set up. You can see I've got this as a nice square canvas, 4,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, and it's not vital to have it as a square canvas, but you do need to take note of the aspect ratio. So of course we're working at 1:1, and we've just got to keep note of that for when we go to set this up. So I'm going to export our texture here. I'll just replace our old one. This is our AO logo. We want it as a JPEG, and I'm also going to click use artboards. This way it won't crop down to just the artwork, and it will give us that 4,000 by 4,000 image. All right, I'll export that, and let's jump back over into Cinema. All right, nice. Let's create a new material and drop that onto our plane. Let's open this up, and this is our AO logo. And I'll want to come down and enable our alpha tab. And this is where we'll pull in that image that we just saved. I'll open that. I'll say no, that's fine, and I'll just click invert. Now at the moment, because our texture underneath is also white, we're not really seeing it, but I will make this full strength white, and we'll jump into our previous material, and let's just give that a little blue. Great, something like that's looking nicely for us to look at. Now already our logo is stuck to our mesh, but of course it's all warped. When we're at no point are we seeing that full clarity logo. So that's really what we want to try and set up. But first we need to find the spot that we want it to be at 100% clarity. Now remember, our rotation, it ends at frame 30, but it does have that 2 frames to sort of settle. So what I'm thinking is maybe frame 32. That's what we're going to say. This is our frame that we want the logo to be 100% visible. So if I grab our AO texture on our plane, you can see we're UV mapped at the moment, but I want to change that to camera mapping. Now we know our camera that we're currently looking through is perfectly centered and it's looking straight down. So I'm just going to duplicate that, and I'm going to rename that projection camera. Let's grab our material, and we'll load our projection camera into the camera area. You can see we are stretched at the moment. So in the film aspect, this is where we can change to what our image output is. And of course we know ours is square, so we can set that to 1, 1. I'm going to jump into our projection camera just so I can reframe exactly how big I want this logo to be. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and you can see that scales down that texture. We'll jump back to our main camera, and with our texture tag selected, I'm just going to disable tile. I only want this to appear once in the center. Now as I scrub through the timeline here, you can see we've still got the animation, but the logo is perfectly projected on every single frame. That's not quite what we're after. So what we're going to need to do on our plane, let's right click and we want to bake as limbic. This is essentially storing our animation in the limbic file. We can disable our plane, we don't need to see that. And we've essentially got the same thing. We've just got another file with that animation already set. And we've got some controls here that we could play with the animation, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So let's just rename this. This is our plane cloth alembic, just to keep it nice and tidy. Now as I grab our AO material, you can see that even here we're still camera mapped. So remember, frame 32, that's where we want this to be fully resolved. Now there's one last thing we need to do. With our now alembic file selected, we're just going to hit C. We're going to make this editable and collapse it down to known mesh. I'm just going to undo that and make sure we do it at frame 0. Hit C. I'll just pull this out of the null it created, and great, we've now got this mesh with a alembic tag that's now storing all that animation data. As I scrub through again, we're still going to get that great animation of our cloth wrapping up around the sphere. All right, so now what we can do at frame 32, with our material selected, come up to tags and select the now available generate UVW coordinates. And that's now changed our tag from camera projected to UVW mapped. And now when I scrub to the timeline, a texture is now sticking to wherever it was touching at frame 32. Now, of course, we could have made this logo appear earlier. We could have made it appear later, wherever we want that sort of full resolve to happen. I think this is kind of nice. We sort of get that end of the wrap, and then it even just unravels a little bit as it sort of settles into place. I think that's kind of cool. Let's now drop this geometry into a subdivision surface, and there we go. We've now got our nice smooth wrinkles again. Now to help just with some of this geometry where it feels like it gets a little bit thin, it's going to hit Shift C and type in cloth so I can grab myself a cloth surface. It's going to zero out the subdivisions, but just add 2 centimeters of thickness. And I'll drop this into our subdivision surface and then include our plane into the cloth surface. And now this just gives it a little bit of thickness. And nice, that's looking pretty good. This is exactly what we're after. And we get that really fun logo reveal. Now, like I said, we can ultimately set up any logo to resolve on this cloth. So I'm just going to jump back into Illustrator, and you can see I've got this FIFA vector also set up. So let's just save that out, and this will be our FIFA logo. Again, making sure to enable use artboard so we can get that square output. And I'll duplicate our AO material, jump into the alpha, and this is where I'll feed that FIFA texture. And what's a bit of fun, now that we've already done the hard work, is we could just replace that existing material. And it's going to take on that same properties. It unravels, and then at frame 32, it's perfectly clear. But maybe what we might like to do is I'm just going to undo that. And I'll just add a selection to that layer, and that's essentially making sure I'm just going to type something into our selection field, and this way we can't see it. And I'll add our FIFA logo, change it to camera mapping, give it that square aspect, and then feed in that camera. It's going to shift our camera over a little bit. And you know what? I'm just going to look through it and just zoom out a little bit, get that logo a little bit bigger. Jump back into our main camera, and yep, that's looking nice. And at frame 40 now, this is where I want it to have fully resolved, a little bit later in the animation. You can see just after that we get a little bit of settling, which is kind of cool. So let's hit play. This is going to start wrapping up around what would be our soccer ball. And then at frame 40 now, this is where we get that nice full resolve. It almost has to hit its peak point and then it will unravel and come back a little bit. So of course this is a bit of fun. You could have it visible right at the start if you wanted to, and then it gets wrapped up to almost hide the logo. So I'm using S24 here. So with that, I can come up to the asset browser here, and for our Australian Open animation, all we need to do is type in tennis. There's a tennis ball model, but there's also this tennis ball material. So let's just throw that into our scene. I'll also grab a soccer ball. Why not? Let's set both these guys up. All right, so I'm going to duplicate our sphere that was used as our blocker, and this can become our tennis ball. Now we don't need the dynamics tag on it, so we'll delete that, and then we'll feed that, and then we can just throw on that tennis material. Might need to rotate our sphere a little bit. Sorry, let me just hide our blocker. And great, as I rotate this around, you can start to see the little grooves there on the tennis ball. Going to jump back onto our plane and do the same thing with our FIFA logo. Just add something to our selection so we can't see it, and then clear the one on our AO logo so we can get that back. And nice. All right, so when it came to animating this ball, I essentially just eyeballed it. We tried to get it about right. So we know that the cloth is going to start wrapping up at about frame 5. So let's grab our tennis ball and figure out our rotation so it's on the ball axis. Quite convenient. So we'll at frame 5, we'll add a keyframe for that. And then at frame 30, this is where our animation's going to fully resolve. Let's go. It's going to type in 360 times 2. Let's double it. 720. Beautiful. I'll turn off our subdivisions just so we can see what that looks like. Hitting play. And you can see that I've sent that the opposite way. All right, so that's easy to fix. Let's just grab our keyframe at frame 30 on our ball, and I'll just make that minus 720. Hitting play again, and nice, there we go. We've got our ball rotating around to make it look like that cloth is wrapping up on it. And this is a lot easier to have that essentially second sphere working as the blocker and not needing both things to be happening on the same one. Nice, that's looking really good. Of course, we can re-enable our subdivision surface and our cloth. And we get those really nice wrinkles back again. So last thing, I said we could set up this soccer ball. It's going to drop that as a child of our tennis ball so I can reset its transform. I'm just going to hit T for scale and just start scaling this up until we're about the same size. I'm not going to be too precious here, but we can take that out, hide our tennis ball, and now this little soccer ball null, we just want to animate the same way. So at frame 5, let's give it a keyframe at 0. And at frame 30, we now know that we want this at minus 720. So we'll do the same thing. Add another keyframe. And let's take a look. Our ball spins up and tightly wraps that cloth up and around it. And of course, we don't want to see the AO logo. Let's kill that. And we'll re-enable our FIFA logo. The ball starts spinning. Cloth wraps up thanks to that little rotation. Boom, it hits. And then after a couple of frames to settle, our logo is fully resolved. I think that's kind of cool. I actually kind of like it happening a little bit later rather than it coming good and then drifting back out. So it gets really tight and then it settles a little bit. And that's actually really quite nice. So I guess that's the basis of the technique, and certainly thanks to Chris Schmidt for his tips to get that nice wrinkles using the soft body. It's certainly not something I've ever been able to get with the cloth. It's just the cloth can go cloth sims can certainly go a long way, but working with these soft bodies, I feel like you're getting far more control, and I'm really happy with the results. Yeah, hopefully there was something you can take away from that. Again, make sure you go and check out his videos as well. He really dives into how to handle the soft body thing. I guess this was more about that logo reveal application. So check his out as well, and there'll be no stopping you. All right, thanks guys. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.